Good afternoon and welcome to another video cast from Hendy Consulting, the specialist management consulting provider to the flat panel display industry. And today I wanted to talk to you about how do you think about structuring a joint development agreement or a JDA with the display industry. So I have a large number of clients that are startups and believe that they have some technology or some material or equipment that they want to collaborate with the display industry. And the key question becomes, how should they motivate the display industry to work with them? And that's what we're going to outline in this short presentation, and think about a methodology for outlining how you think about the amount of value that's on the table and how you should structure it. So of course there are lots of motivations for why a startup might want to collaborate with the display industry. The first one being, of course, to take partially finished offering and then work with the display firm to bring it to validation, at the same time making sure that the specifications and the exact process conditions are met. So that's probably the most important one, along with gaining a motivated customer. On the whole, if somebody's made the investment and put the time into getting a technology to marketplace, the customer's likely to be interested in the net result. Of course, that from a venture capital point of view substantially reduces the risk, because display partners involved financially, but also is actively providing feedback and typically using their people to actually help work on the project. Another motivation might be that actually the startup doesn't have all the equipment they need or all of the competencies to finish a complete display, and so sometimes working with the display equipment, the display industry, is getting the access to those competencies. Sometimes it is the case, and we've worked on many such examples, well actually it's about a technology company who might be in many other marketplaces, including electrochromic windows or electric windows of different types, or other marketplaces, and actually what they want to get out of the display industry is access to semi-finished product. And that does indeed actually happen. There is a fairly small illiquid market for semi-finished product, be it Morphosilicon, IGZO or LTPS bipanes and arrays that can be purchased for some of the players in Asia, and of course then access to channels to market. So it's worth saying that I think the display industry has a very different point of view on dealing with multinationals versus early stage startups. I think they are pragmatic on the whole, and they've dealt with enough startups to know that startups often can't afford to completely fund the development of a new technology through to marketplace. So some sort of milestones agreement where actually the display company, if they're really interested in the technology, might actually put real money on the table. So it's either they will pay for milestones or both parties agree to pay each side, but at least it's moving forward towards an end goal and there is active validation going on. Now that changes very heavily if you're a multinational company, where the general stance of the display industry has been you bring it to market totally at your own cost when it's ready, and that's usually a tool that's completely finished. When it's ready, we'll then buy it from you, but please don't look for us for doing much at all in the early stages. And I characterize them here as being spoiled children, but in a way they've just been used to the marketplace treating them that way. Even on fairly serious equipment innovations, the display industry has been able to sit back on the whole and say, get it ready for us and we'll buy it when it's done, but don't expect us to be involved in it. And so that's something you might want to expect. So what is this framework I've been talking about for thinking about it? And I guess it basically comes down to backpicking the economics. The first thing is just working out how much actual value from a display company point of view is on the table here. And this is where Hendy Consulting's knowledge of the downstream marketplaces comes into action, because we can actually try and help our clients think through what actually is the money on the table here. What value gets created for the display player from having access to this technology? The second one then comes in pulling this off. Who puts in what, and then how does the cake potentially get shared out once there is a certain amount of value created? And in doing that, you have to actually be pragmatic in thinking about alternatives for both sides. So what alternatives does a display company have and what alternatives does the startup have in dealing with them? Because I think there is quite a broad range of acceptable negotiation outcomes, and actually who has more alternatives is a key part of forming this. And then finally, there is quite an interesting discussion, and this will be very context sensitive, on how you want that money. So once we've decided, say, it's a 25% share of $100 million of value creation, what form does that money come in? Is it all up front, or is it over time? And then is it over time in either materials or equipment sales or royalties on some sort of IP basis? All of that is actually art, and it comes down to the position of the startup in terms of their needs for cash at different times, and then which are more or less defensible. And my argument has always been that it's easier to defend a high value material than it is a royalty payment to the display industry. So the first thing, of course, is to find the value in use. And so there's lots of different ways of getting at that. Looking at comparable case studies, actually trying to work through the specifics of the customer perceived usage case in that case. Quite often we translate that into a complete overtime NPV model of the benefit for the display company so that you can actually see where the cash flows come, and that's quite a good way of convincing a display company the benefits they're going to see. But then also thinking about the alternative options that might be on the table and the risks, because these are all part and parcel of what the value in use of the technology might be. And then the next question is to work out who's putting in what, and both on a sort of number of man years basis but a money basis, and who really is taking on the fundamental risks. If this is a fairly even collaboration, even if it's between a major display firm and a small supplier, then the negotiation outcome may be nearer to the middle. If the display firm really has many choices in how to get to the marketplace, then the startup is going to have a much leaner proposition to be able to get out of it. So the whole question of who puts in the time, who's taking the technical and commercial risk and the factory risk, and that shouldn't be underestimated, actually becomes fairly important. I think startups often overestimate how much they bring to the table here, but when you're talking about using a line, for example, that's actually in mass production already, then there's an opportunity cost also for the display firm to work on your technology. And of course, it is at the end of the day a negotiation. So one of the things that we do work with executive teams to talk about is just really how differentiated is your offer in this case, versus are you one of several solutions to getting to that technical answer, and displays are usually like that, or is this the only answer, and are you being approached by everyone, and in which case then you've got a much stronger stance on asking for money. And this is a very, very old case example now. We've actually blacked out the details. But it was then to make the point that you can then actually start simulating. Once you even know the amount of the total value you're seeking to get, you can ask the question, how would we like that money? Is there a benefit to the startup in trying to get more of it as an upfront payment, which clearly is more difficult to negotiate, but it certainly can be done, versus a high value material or a royalty rate later? And or simple milestone related payments also are possible. So there's actually quite a lot of art to be done in determining how a deal can get broken. So then the final thing that's worth saying is display companies are actually counterintuitively more likely to work with startups on novel technology, particularly if that concerns accessing the fabs at the bottom of the cycle. When they're full and when the times are good, then actually getting access to their production capacity is actually very difficult. They're on full steam, creating cash flow and delivering product. So actually the weaker times, like the times we are now, are actually the better times to go and collaborate with the display industry and take things forward. And we have done quite a lot of projects on the notion of collaborating over semi-finished materials like biplanes or other parts of the display output, as part of other novel markets that can be done. So to go back to then really the overall framework, and I think that's probably worth us leaving it with, it's actually being quite rational about how much total value does the display company itself get out of this technology innovation. And that's where really our knowledge of how displays get priced and what the market likely reaction is to some of these innovations comes to the fore. But then dividing up fairly who's bringing what to the table in pulling off the technology. In doing so, of course, there's a range, and who has which alternatives in moving the collaboration forward makes a really important part of the negotiation, as per any normal negotiation. And then finally, the question comes down to how would we like to receive that value? And there's actually quite some tactics that could be done there on whether or not this is IP or royalty payments or attached to either equipment sales or high-priced material sales, which some of those are more easily defensive, especially in the eyes of some of the Asian clients, than it would be IP payments alone. Anyway, I hope you found that useful, and I hope it gives you a sense of some of the projects that Hendy Consulting gets involved in. We certainly have done this sort of work quite a number of times in a range of situations across the display industry. Thank you very much.